Yo, what's up guys, hope you guys are doing good. So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto gets a secret scroll from his family, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. So let's get into the video. Lightning flashed across the sky as nature fought the receding demonic energies that had been so recently released. The landscape was torn from the sheer amount of power that had been released and then contained. Everything within was dead or dying except two people who were laying at the edge of one of the craters that dotted the dying place. The Sage of Six Paths was lying on the ground in the middle of an enormous crater that even then was beginning to fill with water. As he lay there, he couldn't believe that his best friend was at death's door because of his own failure, and all because he had almost lost control of the ceremony that was splitting apart the demon he had contained. Flashback: he had less than 6 months to live before the demonic energy of the 10-tailed beast completely destroyed his body, and it was free once again. It was time to use the plan that he had never wanted to. This plan was to split the demon's essence and power in such a way that prevented it from ever returning. As without this it would most likely plunge the world into war for hundreds of years. The yokai in the atmosphere were exorcised by the people who learned to control chakra. They slowly drained the yokai from nature and then expelled it as they used it. By expelling it along with their own energy, it could be consumed by the. This process would also cause more people in the world to grow and develop chakra coils to a greater extent. Even when the demonic yokai was finished being consumed, it would remain so long as the family actively trained and sought out the ability to use their own chakra's might. The plan had been nearly flawless until the new 7-tailed beast took more energy than it should have been, sealed into a stone tablet, and he wasn't fully recovered in time to seal the 8 tails when it was split off from the remaining bulk of demonic yokai. His best and oldest friend was there in an instant and was casting chains of chakra that were able to at least temporarily contain the new demon's power. As soon as he had been able to, he immediately started on the new seals for the 8 tails containment and was feeding in his own energy to its new home. As the last one of the 9 was released from the 10 tails corpse, its very body began killing off the nature around it as the powers clashed. New chains appeared from Kushina's hands as she dumped all of the chakra she had left into the chains that bound the shapeless demon that bore 9 tails. The 8 tails seal flared brightly as its now prisoner was bound tightly into the new cell. Even as he saw his oldest friend's power fading, his hands had begun flashing through the hand seals that she had helped him devise to control the power he was now channeling to contain the last and most powerful of the segments that had split off of the 10 tails. It let out a bestial roar as it took the form of a fox, just it was swallowed by the silver vase that would contain its power for quite some time. The last of the 9 tails' power was fading as Kushina collapsed from overuse of her chakra. Even as he saw her fall, he had started his final set of seals to make sure that even the corpse of the 10 tails would never be used by anyone in the turbulent era that was to come. The body of the 10 tails dissolved as nearly every last drop of his chakra was swallowed by that was sealing the mighty beast's remains in the safest place that he could think of. As he stared up at the night sky, the moon shone so brightly that the patterns on its surface came aglow for even those who didn't know that they were there. A complex set of runes appeared on a crystalline pendant that hung around his neck. The explosion that occurred as the final remaining yokai dispersed wasn't something that he had counted on. Flashback end. Even as they lay there, they both knew that even if they survived this night, they would be living on borrowed time that could end in moments, as it was only the energy from nature that was keeping them alive for the moment. Well, they had some chakra left, it wouldn't have been enough to allow them to live for as long as they already had. As Kushina lay there, a view of an unfamiliar village took control of her vision as the figures fighting a huge 9-tailed fox came into view, and then a blonde man sealed it into a child to stop the deaths that were happening. The masked figure floated over the man's shoulder and was staring straight at her as he drew the demon's soul through the man's body and into the child's, consuming both the man's soul and a portion of the tainted energy that the fox was giving off. Slowly the vision faded away and all that was left was the masked figure that still stood just looking at her. After a time that could have been infinity or a single second, he spoke in a chilling voice. "I am the Shinigami, the god of death, and you are so close to death that I can speak with you," the masked figure stated as it almost played with the knife that it held in its right sleeve covered hand. "The vision that I have shown to you is an event that will happen a great many years from now, and from his mother's side the child that you just saw is your direct descendant." The figure stared off into the distance as the bluish energy around its knife seemed to swirl even brighter than it had before, continuing. "He will live a hard life because of those who want him to be a weapon and those that see him as a demon, but throughout it he will live on and struggle through until he achieves his goal of being seen as himself and not the monster that he holds." The Shinigami turned its glowing gaze back upon Kushina as its visible power took upon another hue before continuing. "You and your sage friend are only alive because you both hold knowledge that the child that I showed you may need in his life to prevent a tragedy that even I, the death god, would not wish upon humanity. The only question is, will you record all of the knowledge that you hold so that your descendant may have a better chance to stop the resurrection of the Ten Tails? Her body was frozen as she listened to the death god, and a short vision of the child's future was brought before her eyes should she not provide what help she could. Her mind clouded by the tears and her eyes wet, her gaze met the Shinigami's once again, and she wordlessly conveyed that she would make to the best of her ability, that everything that she could leave would be left to that unnamed descendant of hers. You have made your choice, and while even I cannot say that you will be able to leave everything that you know all at once, I can promise you that even without your help, he would have been a person that would never lose, and that there is a very good chance that in the final battle he would have won. It never hurts to carry the extra power though, so now life has a much better chance of survival. The last thing that I will tell you about that though, is that no matter what else he does, your descendant will carry a pure heart and soul throughout his life. A soul so pure in fact that some of Kami's angles look dirty in comparison to his spirit. Now however, I'm afraid that I must lock most of your memories away until the day that we meet again, but you will remember the task that you have taken upon yourself, and that you took it willingly, even if you don't remember why. The Shinigami turned to leave when one last sentence left its mouth. You have the last 4 months that the sage would have had before the 10 tails would have devoured him, before both of your life forces fade into death, so I would suggest that you get him to help you in your task. Several hundred years later, a young girl by the same name stood before the daimyo of Haino as the ninja team that had rescued her stood waiting upon his decision. For what seemed like an eternity, as the daimyo discussed the proposal that she had given. After several hours, the daimyo turned back to her and lightly said, I agree with this proposal on the understanding that when you should choose to retire from your ninja career, that you help in the governance of your former people, and that one of your children marries one of my granddaughters when the time should come. Until that marriage at least, none of the villages hidden in the leaves save the shall know of your true heritage. However, the child that is to marry one of my granddaughters will need to spend at least some of his childhood here at the capital so that they may know one another for when the time comes. The young girl arose from the low cushion that had been provided for her earlier and bowed to the fire daimyo and said in a very formal voice, I thank you for respecting my family's traditions and for letting me join your country's hidden village. Though I am the last of my family, and I would like to leave a duplicate of a scroll that my family has passed down from the time of the Sage of Six Paths within your library. The last statement caught the daimyo's attention, as things from that day and age were rare and hard to find. He gently asked, what is contained in this most ancient of scrolls, so that I may know what is within my library? What little light there had been within Kushina's eyes vanished as she almost blankly replied, the history of my family, as well as all of the knowledge that my family has been accumulating throughout the time since then. It contains volumes on every subject that we have ever come across, from battle strategy to ninja arts to the sealing arts. It is a duplicate copy to the one I'm going to carry with me to my new home in case something happens to the original to where it cannot be handed down, and so that at the very least the knowledge will not be lost. As she finished speaking, one of her ninja escort stepped forward and presented a scroll to Kushina, who in turn knelt before the daimyo while presenting the scroll, which he gladly accepted. As he tried to unfurl the scroll, he found it sealed shut with an unfamiliar seal on the opening and so decided to ask about its usage. How do you open this scroll, if I may ask, young Uzumaki Haim? The scroll is under a modified blood seal so that it will open whenever a drop of blood from my family hits the seal. The scroll opens until it is closed and then it resets, Kushina said with a sad smile on her face. The real secret to the seal though is that if there should ever come a time when there are no blood members of the Uzumaki family left, the seal will dissolve and the scroll will be able to be opened normally. However, a number of the storage seals inside will destroy their contents at that point. And if that should happen, would I need to worry about any of the other contents of my library being in danger from this scroll? The daimyo calmly asked as he looked with newfound respect upon the large scroll that he held. No, the storage seals in the scroll are set up so that only the contents of select seals will be incinerated while leaving no outward trace until that seal is opened to show the ashes of its former contents, Kushina replied as her eyes finally began to gain back some of their warmth before she continued. When I was fleeing Yuzu, I was given these 2 scrolls by my uncle before he led the people away from my trail, and one other that held a very special family tree as well as the treasury of the Uzumaki family that he had managed to save. The family tree consists of seals and goes back to the time of the Sage of Six Paths. What makes it so special is that it changes itself accordingly for the situation of the owners of the names it depicts. It shows all of my living relatives and the deceased who have a red background upon their name, and only one name still bears a blue living background, and that is Tsunade Senju, which is why I chose the Leaf Village for my new home and why I chose to leave a copy of this scroll here. The blonde man slowly walked away from the hospital with his hour-old son, swathed in blankets held tightly in his arms, as tears slid down his cheeks even as the 9-tailed fox made its way ever closer to the village from where it had reformed after being freed from its captivity. His white trench coat had the kanji for Yondaime on the back. As he made his way to his office in the tower, already knowing what must be done, even as he heard his wife's last words, as he sealed the last remnants of her spirit and chakra so that if nothing else their son would have the chance to meet his mother. At least once in his life, when he incorporated several very special seals into the formula for the contract that he was about to use. The summon the death god was a fearsome and powerful ability, however within one's life each person who had signed the contract was allowed to summon the Shinigami twice. Once to set up the contract and then to actually perform and he had just finished setting up the sealing arrays in case the fox tried to break free when his wife gave birth, and gone to check up on Kushina when he had been informed of the fox's imminent attack, and the more it attacked, the more wild and powerful the attacks became. Now he was just wishing that he hadn't been so dense when he had been younger, so that he and his wife would have had more time together before she had died. As he sat down in his office, he tapped a seal on the underside of the desk and a scroll popped out. Now to most this scroll wouldn't have been very special because it mostly looked like just a simple painting of his marriage ceremony after he had finally discovered that he loved the red-haired princess from Whirlpool. However, it also contained seals hidden within some of the more elaborate designs. Closing the scroll, he smiled over at his son, who was slowly moving around on the low sofa in the corner. The sealing that he used on the scroll was a modified blood seal, so that if Naruto hadn't claimed it within 20 years, then anyone could open the scroll. Several hand seals later, and a poof was heard as a toad appeared out of a small cloud of smoke. "You need something?" the orange and green vest wearing toad asked, almost as if annoyed at being summoned. "Yes, I will be resealing the nine-tailed fox soon," Yondaime replied sadly as he began writing out another scroll carefully. "I'll need you to deliver a scroll to both the daimyo and the toad elders," Yondaime concluded as he finished writing on the scroll he had been working on and moved over to Naruto. Pulling a small vial out of his pocket, he carefully pricked Naruto's arm and let several drops of blood fall into the vial before using a small medical to repair what he had done. Taking a minute to mix the blood into a small pot of ink, he carefully began inscribing a seal on the scroll before repeating the process in between Naruto's shoulder blades. Wrapping up the scrolls, he gave them to the small toad, saying, "The red scroll goes to the daimyo to tell him what will happen here tonight, while the other scroll goes to the elder toads. Before you go, I'd like to thank you for all the times that you helped me in the past with messages and such. I only have one other message for you to deliver, and that is that I'm going to be summoning Gamabunta in a short while to give me a hand in sealing the fox away." As the small toad disappeared in a puff of smoke with the scrolls, Minato was starting over at the horizon, where the dull red glow was getting brighter as the fox slowly solidified its form for the first time in almost 100 years. It had been almost a week since Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage, had sacrificed himself to stop the Kyuubi rampage upon its release, and the daimyo sat in his office reviewing the letter he had gotten from the toad summon that had arrived just hours after the sealing had been done. In essence, all the letter was asking was that he give the scroll Kushina had left in his library all those years ago, before she had moved to Konohagakure to Naruto sometime after he was 6, along with an update to the scroll that Kushina had made throughout her life, so that the scroll would have all of the information. As the copy that Kushina had added to the copy of the scroll that had been sealed behind the doors of the Yondaime's house before Minato had died. Sighing, as he looked out the window, he wondered which one of his granddaughters he would engage young Naruto to when the time came, and silently decided that it might not be a bad idea if his wife stayed at their house in Konohagakure and kept an eye on things, as well as the development of Naruto, so that he would have an idea of what to expect when he met him. As the daimyo of Fire Country was entertaining these thoughts, Gamabunta was deep into conversation with the elder toads that still lived on Mount Myaboku. Minato set up that summoning seal on the back of Naruto's neck so that even if we choose not to allow him to sign our contract, we could at least meet and judge him to see if he should be allowed to sign. Besides, if we wait for Jiraiya to let him sign the contract, then there is no telling when or if he will sign our contract, and we owe Minato too much to not do at least this for him, Gamabunta said before taking another large pull from his pipe before exhaling a large cloud of smoke. Two of the elder toads looked at each other for a moment before nodding and asking, "That wasn't really the question about Gamabunta, but rather when we should summon him here to test him." Taking another long draft from his pipe, Gamabunta replied, "I'd say that at about somewhere between 8 through 15, if no one has any suggestions." At this suggestion, all of the elder toads nodded nearly simultaneously, although if it was from agreement or from them falling asleep, Gamabunta would never know. On another plane of existence, two spirits were waking up as they slowly moved to stand before a chilling voice finished waking up. "I hope you two have had a restful sleep considering where you are," it said, as they both saw the ghastly vision of the Shinigami sitting on an ebon throne in a darkened castle room. Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze were left gaping at the Shinigami and the place that surrounded them and couldn't help shuddering every time they looked at the Shinigami. Normally the both of you would never have come to this place after you died, however, because of the fragments of your soul that are still contained within the seal that you used on your son. You cannot move past this point until the day that your son has released those portions of the seal and lets you free, the Shinigami continued. Between now and then you may look upon his life through the orb in the middle of this room so that you may see just what your choices have meant for your son. Chapter 1. 6 years had passed since the Kyuubi had been sealed within a child, and it was once again the anniversary of the night that the nine-tailed fox had attacked the village hidden in leaves. Many things had changed in the intervening years, and at the forefront of it was the fact that the village was only back up to 2/3 of its strength from before the attack. The third had resumed his post as the acting leader of the village and had issued 2 laws almost immediately after his reinstatement, and of those laws one was out in the open and the other was agreed upon by the daimyo of Fire Country that the secret was to remain hidden for at least a number of years to rebuild the ninja forces of Hai No. The first law was given to the villagers and stated that no villager was to talk about the nine-tailed fox beyond the cover story that had been circulated, while the second law was that Naruto Uzumaki's true heritage not to be told to anyone and that it was to be a double S-class secret to any and all who didn't know. The cover story that he had used an orphan and that it is the effects of the sealing that caused Naruto to look like Minato Namikaze. There wasn't a very long list of people that knew the truth because very few had known of Minato's marriage to Kushina Uzumaki. The Fire Daimyo was among the number because he had been at the small wedding that had been held in the capital about a month before Minato was supposed to take over for Sarutobi. Many things had happened since that small ceremony that had been held in a hidden portion of the capital. 2 years previously Naruto Uzumaki had been thrown out of the orphanage and lived on the streets for 2 months before the third found him curled up in a ball on the edge of a training ground when he had been out for a stroll to check up on the various genin teams in person since he had made a significant dent in his most hated foe. After all, for such a persistent foe it was only right to give it time to recover, right? In those 2 years Naruto had been taught the basics of how to live on his own by the various genin teams that had been assigned to do so. As time had passed the teams had slowed down on how often they had come until they had stopped coming a month before and he had been forced to make do on his own. And then came that night. He was running. His legs were burning and he could barely breathe beyond the quick short pants that weren't helping very much. As he turned the corner he came face to face with another one of the groups that were taking an almost perverse delight in cornering him. Several of the villagers started throwing rocks at him as they chased him until one struck him on the back of the knee, jerking his leg out from under him. He fell forward and to the side, sliding some until he hit the wall on the side of the alley. As the villagers beat on him they were yelling things at him, which made no sense with the pounding in his head from the impact against the wall as he stopped. After several minutes of this his world turned black and he knew no more. He slowly opened his eyes to the plain white walls that surrounded him and the chemical smell that coated every medical building he had ever been in. Taking a closer look at the room showed that it was one of the rooms that he knew were in the Hokage's tower on the 2nd floor. This was the yet another time he had been treated for a number of various injuries in the past 2 years since he had been thrown out of the orphanage. Looking around the small treatment room his eyes came to rest on a small calendar on a desk in the corner. Each date had been crossed out up until the current date, October 10, his 6th birthday. 4 ninja in ceremonial armor came in through the door and stood in each of the corners of the room and removed 2 ninja to one side of the room furthest from the door. A third was also attempted to be removed from behind a hidden panel in the ceiling and tried attacking when he was exposed. He was sporting a bloody grin on his throat almost instantly and one of the 4 in ceremonial armor picked up the corpse and along with the 2 who had been hidden in the room previously disappeared in a column of leaves and a slight wind. 4 more people entered the room, these ones obviously samurai from the set of their armor and took up positions on either side of the door and one at the other door, leaving the last to take the gap next to the window. A man and woman entered the room and, as the door shut Naruto caught a glimpse of another 2 guards taking up position on the other side of the door. The man was in a very elaborate haymaker and projected a presence well into the room. The woman wore a similarly elaborate kimono that almost screamed nobility. "Ah, Naruto," the man began. "You worried me for a while after my guards rescued you from that mob." Now Naruto was confused and all he could think about to himself was why had this man cared enough to save him. He didn't voice this thought to the man, though instead he asked, "I'm sorry, but who are you?" Normally Naruto wasn't much for manners and other formal things, but this man had helped him, so the least he could do was be polite for now. "Ah, at this time my name won't mean anything to you, however to partially sate your curiosity I am the daimyo of Hai No, and this is my wife Lady Shimji," the man stated before he continued. 6 years ago I received a letter from a man that was a friend of mine to look out for his son, and that, as the executioner of his will to keep a hold of everything that was supposed to go to his son until his son was old enough to manage it himself. Now with the information that my informants in the village have gathered for me in the last few hours, as well as the file on you that they gave me after I told him why I wanted to know, I see how to accomplish the favor that my old friend asked of me. Nodding toward the door, the samurai opened the door to let a kunoichi in less elaborate clothing walk in, sporting a noticeable limp. This is Kasala. She is a retired kunoichi that used to guard my wife until she was injured almost 2 years ago in an assassination attempt. Currently she runs a small apartment building that has a vacancy that I have arranged for you to live in for now, and she will also take over and teach you what the orphanage was supposed to teach you, but failed to. She may even teach you some of the shinobi arts. At this point Naruto was very confused, but his confusion only jumped to higher points when he gestured to the samurai next to the door, and the door opened again to allow in another fancily dressed samurai that was carrying a seemingly heavy chest. This chest contains a number of things from your parents, as well as a number of other things. Now Kasala has been briefed about a number of facts and will teach you and show you when the time is right. Now I must take my leave, as I've already taken more time than my schedule would normally allow, and my paperwork beckons. But that he and his wife left the room, and the next several weeks were a whirlwind of activity, as plans were made, and Naruto was getting used to the new information that he had been given. 6 years after, night of the graduation exam. Naruto, while sitting in the clearing in front of a shack in the woods, couldn't help but think to himself that this supposed makeup test really was stupid for an evil plot made by a Chunin. The funny thing was that he hadn't even stolen the real forbidden scroll, rather he had just taken one of the large blank scrolls from the storage room down the hall, while he had hidden the real forbidden scroll underneath Hokage's desk. He would have taken the real scroll, but he just didn't need the kind of punishment that it would entail if his plan didn't pan out. Looking back, he thought about the things that he had been working on for the last 6 years since he had met the daimyo of Fire Country and his training and his family legacy began. Hiding almost all of his proficiency in the ninja arts had been a continuous effort, and some of the seals that he had applied to his own body and clothes were very much a part of the deception. Sure, the Hokage suspected something of what skills he was hiding, but not nearly everything that he actually was. Hearing a rustling in the trees, he schooled his features into the innocent enthusiasm that he would be feeling if he had actually entirely been the person he portrayed himself as. He looked up and barely stopped himself from reacting in shock. Standing over him was Iruka, and not Mizuki, who was looking fairly angry. "What did you think you were doing stealing the forbidden scroll, Naruto?" Iruka all but yelled at Naruto. "But, didn't Mizuki tell you that he assigned me the makeup exam for a mock mission?" Naruto stated quickly in the hope that Iruka could figure out what was going on. As Iruka put everything together in his head, the sound of a wire being cut echoed in the clearing. As several kunai were sailing into the clearing, Iruka pushed Naruto out of the way of the blades and was knocked against the wall of the shack. "Ah, Iruka, I was hoping to save you for later, but then you just had to be here at this meeting," Mizuki said with a satisfied smirk on his face. "Naruto gives me the scroll, and you passed the makeup exam," Mizuki said as he regained his seriousness. "Naruto, he's lying, there is no makeup exam, he's using you to steal the scroll," Iruka yelled as he ripped a kunai out of his leg. Mizuki chuckled as he said, "You talk about lying to him when everyone around him has been lying to him his whole life. Ever since the law 12 years ago." "No, Mizuki, it's forbidden," Iruka yelled as the law of the third came to mind. "What is this law?" Naruto asked, curious as to what secret Mizuki would spill to get an easy opening. "The law is that the fourth didn't kill the nine-tailed fox, rather he sealed it into a human body," Mizuki said with a slight sadistic tone creeping into his voice. "You, Naruto Uzumaki, are the nine-tailed fox." Naruto was shocked. It was true that he suspected that the nine-tailed fox had been sealed in him, however he had never quite gotten any proof other than a few hastily hushed whispers, the names that he was called, the mobs of inebriated people that would occasionally chase him, and the seal on his stomach that he had yet to decode even a third of. In his distracted state he never saw the shuriken that Mizuki had thrown. "Naruto, get down," Iruka yelled as he moved as fast as he could in front of the shuriken's path to stop it from hitting Naruto. Brain finally rebooted due to the attack by Mizuki from the information that he had received. He dodged around Iruka on the left while drawing a rather unusual kunai with his right hand in a reverse grip. The kunai was a dull bluish white rather than the usual black. One sharp jerk forward and the shuriken was cut neatly in two and off in two slightly different directions, with one landing short of its intended targets while the other grazed Iruka's back, cutting a vertical slit in the red spiral and a shallow gash into his back beneath it, fortunately not cutting anything that couldn't be healed with a few days rest and some bandages to help constrict the wound, or even faster if it was taken care of by a medical ninja. "Sensei, why did you try and protect me?" Naruto even asked as he took up a protective stance from Mizuki. Because you remind me so much of myself back when I was an academy student. Iruka stated as he wobbled a bit from the pain from his wounds. You're always trying so hard and even when you fail you get up and laugh about it. It was like looking in a reflection of the way that I once was. That's a lie, Iruka would say anything right now to make you keep the scroll, Mizuki said before releasing an evil laugh. Kunai disappeared back where Naruto ran. Running almost diagonally from where he knew the village to be from where he was. The trail behind him was wide left, obviously enough for even Mizuki to find, even though he wasn't as good at tracking as other Chunin were supposed to be. With Iruka and Mizuki following him, he knew that he would need to hide soon so that he could contemplate the new information that Mizuki had let escape, as well as the truth behind why Iruka treated him as he did on occasion. Lost in his own thoughts, he almost didn't notice as Mizuki and Iruka landed near him and talking, and even then he didn't register any of the short conversation that they had until he heard Mizuki state, Naruto is a beast, and like a beast, he'll pour his rage and hate into the scroll and use its techniques for his own power to destroy what he hates. Mizuki's laughter echoed over the area as Naruto mentally went through what he knew of Mizuki's skills. In the near silence, Naruto heard a slight chuckle that escaped Iruka before he pulled himself into a more upright position and said, "You're right, that is how a beast would act." Silence settled across the clearing as Naruto began thinking about how much of an act Iruka was putting on with how he had acted earlier and how much he had lied to him over the years. The next sentence that came from Iruka's mouth blew all of those thoughts right out of Naruto's head as Iruka continued, "But Naruto isn't like that. Sure, he makes mistakes, but he works hard, even though everyone jumps on him for his mistakes, but his suffering only makes him stronger, so you're wrong, he's not a beast. He's Naruto Uzumaki of the Leaf Village." "You're a fool," Mizuki said as he unclipped the second shuriken from his back and started spinning it in his hand. "I was hoping to save you for later, but I changed my mind." Charging forward as he finished his speech, Mizuki never saw the knee that connected with his chin. His overly large shuriken was sent flying into the forest. Landing and tossing the large scroll he carried so that it landed near Iruka, Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, "Lay a hand on my sensei again and you will die." "Ah, like you could do anything to me, brat," Mizuki said as he regained his balance from being thrown back. "Just try a punk like you can't do anything to a Chunin like me, I can take you down with just one attack. Just try it, but I should warn you, you've already lost," Naruto said calmly before making a strange hand sign before pulling out several of the blue-white kunai and throwing them. None of their paths would hit him, so Mizuki just let the kunai fly past him. Pulling out one last kunai, Naruto threw it at his feet and formed one last hand sign before touching the kunai. Chains erupted from every kunai, connecting them into a box-like shape around Mizuki, trapping him within its confines. A bluish barrier snapping into place just inside the confines of the chains, along with a faint blue sheen covering the ground beneath Mizuki's feet. Panicking a bit, Mizuki shot forward and bounced off one of the walls of the barrier. Several minutes passed as Mizuki tried more and more desperately to break the barrier that he was trapped in. His chest rose and fell more and more rapidly as each attack failed. Soon he slumped to the ground in the center of the barrier. After waiting another minute, Naruto let the barrier drop. Almost instantly Mizuki's breathing got better as soon as the barrier dropped. Pulling 4 more kunai from somewhere on himself, Naruto launched them so that one was next to each of his limbs. Unzipping and reaching into his jacket, there was a slight poof of smoke and his hand removed a black-bladed katana with 3 links of chain extending from the hilt. As Iruka saw Naruto move toward Mizuki's head with a sword in hand, he just about yelled, "Naruto, what do you think you're doing?" Sorry sensei," Naruto said while rubbing the back of his head, although he hadn't stopped circling around toward Mizuki's head. "I just don't want Mizuki waking up and escaping before the whole story gets out." As Naruto finally got around to Mizuki's head and began moving closer and began raising his katana over his head, Iruka yelled, "Naruto, stop." As the blade tore home, ripping into the ground, Iruka had closed his eyes when, because of his injuries, he couldn't get around to stop it in time and didn't want to see his one-time friend die in front of him. Opening his eyes when he only heard the sound of a blade cutting earth, he saw the odd side of Naruto's katana stabbed into the ground just to the left of Mizuki's neck, barely nicking his throat and drawing a slight amount of blood that ran down the blade. Naruto was standing next to the katana, running through hand seals somewhat slowly, showing that while he knew the technique he was using, it wasn't one that he had practiced extensively. Noting that it took a huge number of seals, Iruka saw several among the sequence that he didn't recognize before Naruto layered his hands over each other so that his palms lined up together and a white energy surrounded them. Sealing style. 5-chain restriction seal. Seal. Naruto roared as he slapped his palms down on the sword and they moved his palms over the sides of the hilt with seals lighting up all along the blade of the katana. Chains started forming from both the katana and every one of the kunai that wrapped around the limb that they were closest to. A strong flash of light nearly blinded Iruka as it lit up the clearing to brighter than it had ever been. As the light cleared, black markings were spreading along Mizuki's neck, wrists, and ankles. After almost a minute of the markings shifting, they settled into markings circling around each of the affected limbs, with a circle with the kanji for restrict facing the direction that had one of the kunai or sword piercing the ground nearest him. That should hold him for a while, Naruto said as he gathered up the weapons and returned them to their hiding places. Iruka struggled to come to terms with the new information about his student. Placing his fingers into a cross-shaped hand seal, Naruto called out, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." And in 5 puffs of smoke there were now 6 identical orange-clothed blondes. 4 blondes moved over to Mizuki and positioned themselves at each of his limbs, picked him up, and started toward the village. The last shadow clone moved over to Iruka and helped him stand up because while Iruka wasn't injured enough that he couldn't walk, his balance wasn't the best at the moment. The original grabbed the blank scroll from where he had stashed it. After they reached the tower among a large grumbling group of chunin, Iruka was shocked when the Hokage handed Naruto a headband and congratulated him on a job well done. Several hours later, after a number of chunin and finally moved off after finding out that not only had the stolen scroll been hidden in the Hokage's office the whole time, but that the chunin that had raised the alarm had been the real one trying to steal the scroll, and that the demon brat had a number of skills that he had kept hidden. Iruka and Sandaime were talking about team placements, as the recently graduated student teachers would normally do to help assign the new teams. "I'm still not quite sure how Sakura managed to get the top Kunoichi spot when I'm looking at her file," Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, said as he looked through the files that were across his desk. Yes, well, between the fact that this year there were only 2 Kunoichi from clans and the fangirlish tendencies that they almost all had, none of them except Hinata reached over the minimum physical limit, so most of the Kunoichi rankings are by the bookwork and tests that are given during the year, and if you look, Sakura is very smart when it comes to bookwork, Iruka answered while scratching his nose nervously. "Ah, yes, I see the notation in the file now," Sarutobi replied as he saw the yellow warning tape on the side of the folder. "Could you explain how she beat both Ino and Hinata from her class though? Ino and Sakura were friends at one time, and over time both became fangirls of Sasuke Uchiha, and because of what she thought would win her Sasuke, her training suffered." Iruka began, with Sarutobi nodding after a certain point as the facts clicked in his mind. Hinata, on the other hand, while she exceeded the physical requirements for Kunoichi, did not meet the required level in other areas, as far as we could determine. Now, there is a very high probability that it was a problem with her self-confidence that caused her to score so low on the tests, but there isn't anything that we could do, as we can only score students on what they decide to show in class. "Okage-sama, what are we going to do about Naruto, because with his graduation, it puts the numbers off by 1. Iruka said suddenly, as he had just counted the number of folders on the desk. "Don't worry, Iruka, I already noticed that problem and have a solution to it," Sarutobi said as he continued leafing through the folders on his desk, idly making notes on possible teams on a paper to the right. "For now we will institute him as a one-man cell under the pretext that either more will be assigned to his team as we get more genin in need of a team, or he will be moved onto an existing team when one of their members is promoted or dies. Also, for right now he won't have an assigned instructor, but that will change when he either gets more people on his team or when he is moved onto a team." As Iruka started to open his mouth to complain, Sarutobi continued, "And before you complain, you need to know that even if Naruto were sent back to the academy, as he has already graduated once, he is no longer eligible for the orphan stipend and he would be required to work out some way to get money, and this will allow him to do D-rank missions, even if he doesn't pass the test that I'm going to give him to ensure that he meets the requirements of a freshly graduated genin. Who knows, maybe I'll assign myself as his supervisor until he has more teammates. It would certainly get me out of this office more often, even if it was just to observe his training." The protests that Iruka had been about to make died on his lips as the Sandaime partially explained his plan if Naruto were to pass the test that he was going to give him. Naruto woke up in his apartment. He looked around in memory of all of the times that he had looked around the room he was in now. It wasn't until the second glance around the room that he noticed that not only was the door missing but the window was as well. As he jerked himself out of bed, he fell to the floor before noticing the huge trapdoor that lay open by his feet. So he fell screaming into a seemingly endless void, devoid of any markings of passage save for the feeling of falling. Finally he landed in water that seemingly came from nowhere. As he stood up in the waist-deep water, he found himself in a passage that led into what looked like a sewer. He waded over to the higher side of the tunnel and he wondered just where he was. As he moved along the tunnel, he noticed the water decreased, however it was in long, sluggishly moving lines. Wandering along the passage, Naruto couldn't help but wonder to himself just what was causing this strange event. Careful to avoid the deeper sections of water, he soon found himself at a crossroads in the path. One path led below the water, but had a more pleasant feel to it, while the others didn't dip nearly as far into the water. They didn't carry the feeling of light at the end either. All of the other paths lead back to under the water, but none held the light feeling that was present at the end of this one. The path above the water held a feeling of greater darkness around it. Taking a deep breath, Naruto dove into the water and started swimming. Fragments of memories became visible before his eyes for an instant, before vanishing back into the murky depths. Soon he came to the surface and found himself in a bright corridor with many colored doors that seemed to drive the water away. As he opened each door he would relive a memory, and with each memory he was relieved of pure happiness. The water which had seemed so oppressive just moments before was looking cleaner than when he first came in. Every door that he had opened to now bore an image of what the memories represented. The last door that he opened wasn't a memory in the normal sense, because it was only an image that seemed to be continuously looping of a red-haired woman and a blonde-haired man, both with faces filled with happiness, as they looked on the wrapped bundle in the woman's arms. A tiny hint of blonde hair was sticking from the blanket, as well as the whiskers that were visible on his cheeks. As the last door closed behind him, he moved back into the water, returning to the crossroads that had stopped him before. With the weight on his shoulders lessened, he once again was moving along the path. Many bends in the path almost disguised the fact that he seemed to be moving lower, even as pipes began flowing along the ceiling and walls, each one with a small circle of what looked like glass, showing what passed through them, was colors so vastly different from one another that it passed through the rainbow, leaving almost no color untouched. As he moved further, even more colors emerged in the intersections, although how in the world there was something that was colored plaid was in those pipes Naruto didn't want to know. Eventually he came to a door upon which a howling fox head could be seen. Almost hesitantly he opened the door and entered the room. As he entered, torches within the room lit and began shedding their light upon the room. At first it was as if there was nothing in the room, but as the light spread, a cage with golden bars came into view. But the lights only barely penetrating the cage, he saw at each corner of the cage, bound with chains on their wrists and with their lower bodies stuck within the pillars, was the very same blonde-haired man and red-headed woman from the last door that he had opened in the corridor that held his happier memories. As Naruto started rushing toward the prone figure of the red-haired woman, a dark voice from the shadows next to the cage spoke. They won't wake. Stopping and staring toward the voice, Naruto had trouble finding his voice as a figure stepped from the shadows. Wearing robes and carrying prayer beads, the demonic-looking figure cut a frightening visage as he moved toward Naruto. Suddenly finding his voice, Naruto all but yelled, "Why not? Why won't she wake, and for that matter why won't he either? Because they are nothing but fragments of souls tied into the seal that hold the cage shut, and once their purpose is done, they shall be united with the rest of their soul, which awaits them in my castle between the borders of this life and the next." The terrifying figure continued. "Who are you, and who are they?" Naruto asked, as his fear gradually subsided. "I, Naruto, am the god of death, kami of all things that reside in the departure of souls, and the ferryman for departed souls to the afterlife. I am the Shinigami, and for this moment you have nothing to fear of me." The Shinigami introduced himself. "And, as for the souls that bound themselves to that duty, I will introduce you to them soon, but first we have more pressing matters. If you would show yourself." Echoing laughter echoed from within the cage as two giant red eyes opened and began staring down at them. A momentary surge of fear enveloped Naruto as he looked up and saw those malevolent eyes staring down on him, as well as the evil grin that formed within the darkness and added its own feeling of malevolence and insanity to the terror that overwhelmed Naruto. On seeing the terror, its smile widened to show more of its huge fangs. In a booming deep evil voice it spoke, "So the child fears the demon, and yet the evils that I have committed pale in comparison to many of the evils that humanity has perpetrated. Now isn't the time to discuss philosophy in Kyuubi." The Shinigami sadly, in a much less evil tone, projecting this time. "Now, Naruto, as you know now, on the night of your birth the Kyuubi was sealed into you. And while I do not wish to begin explaining the story to you, some of it is pertinent to why I brought you here. The technique used to seal the Kyuubi into you is called Shiki Fusion, and it draws its power from the life force of the person using it. Normally it is a suicide technique that allows the user to absolutely kill one other being and placing them both at my feet in judgment. However, in this case it was different because the fourth Hokage changed how it worked slightly, and instead of taking the Kyuubi's soul, I ripped as much energy as I could from the Kyuubi and caused its soul and the remainder of its energy to be sealed within you. A fragment of my own energy followed as well to make sure that it didn't escape before your death. The main reason that the sealing was done this way was that the Kyuubi normally doesn't fall under my jurisdiction, as it is truly immortal, and, as such, normally I cannot affect its soul and being. As for the two souls chained to the cage, they are fragments from your parents that are here to help reinforce the seal. They have another purpose, however, that I can't tell you what it is. There are quite a number of things that I could tell you, but because of the rules on the intervention of deities into the lives of mortals I shall not. You see, in instances like these, the information that I could give you would require that either you offer payment to me for it or I shall suffer a penalty that I do not wish to pay. Naruto's head was spinning as he committed all that he had been told to memory and asked, "Could you stop for a minute? This is getting hard to take in." Several minutes of silence followed as Naruto went over the information that he had been given and got it straight in his head. Finally he said, "Please continue. The only reason that I have given you that break is because some of the things that I will impart to you tonight will be hard to understand at first. However, if you will not interrupt me again, we can be done that much sooner." The Shinigami continued. "Now, I have given you most of the background information that you will need to understand why I brought you here tonight. As I told you earlier, a fragment of my energy entered the seal to make sure that Kyuubi could not escape and so that I could judge him for his crimes. However, that is not the only effect that this energy has had upon you. Until you received your headband, I kept the abilities locked away, but the fragment of my energy didn't directly interact with yours. However, some of your energy in close contact with mine has begun mimicking mine. Currently this energy doesn't give you many abilities, however this may change with time. Currently you can call upon any souls that are caught between the borders of life and death, and you can see the aura of darkness around people who have broken universal laws or who have committed unspeakable atrocities in their lives." He waved his hand, and a small clock appeared upon the wall next to the door that read 10 o'clock as the Shinigami continued. "More than half of this world has at one time or another committed some act of evil, and this clock represents how long I will allow you to summon the souls to your mindscape here. And you may get more time upon this clock for all the evils that a soul you sent to me committed that you had no influence in. Those are the powers that you have now, however I do not know what other powers you may develop in the future. So right now I can call any soul that is between life and death, but you are limiting me to an amount of time equivalent to the amount of evil I send you from this world." Naruto asked, as many ideas ran through his head. "Yes, young Naruto, but the reason that I am putting a limit on how long the souls may be called is because nothing in life or the afterlife is truly free, and if you have to work for the time you will appreciate it more." The Shinigami replied. "So where did the 10 hours come from?" Naruto asked somewhat confusedly. That time came both from your own actions, which have had several very corrupt men killed, and the fact that your parents have been helping me with my duties, so that I have had more free time than usual these past 12 years. The Shinigami said, as if slightly embarrassed about admitting the second part. "Currently the only souls that you may call are the souls of your parents, as they are the only ones who built up a debt to me before their deaths." "Thank you, Shinigami-sama," Naruto said, as he bowed to the god. "Now, I must leave, but I suggest that you have a talk with Kyuubi and then spend 5 hours with your parents to use up all of your accumulated time." The Shinigami finished before he began fading away. After the last pieces of the Shinigami disappeared, Naruto began moving closer to the cage and asked, "What did he want you to tell me?" A deep booming voice from earlier answers, "There are several things that are the direct result of things that I or the seal have done, but I think that he wanted me to tell you about the fact that your transformation technique is much different than normal. Because of several factors that happened before your birth and after with the seal, your body modified itself to take on one of my abilities. The ability of true transformation rather than just of casting an illusion over your body. The main reason that I mentioned this is that after a certain number of times that you transform into the same form, your body will lock it in as a default form. You won't be stuck permanently in the form by any means, but if it gets locked in, then there is a chance that you could spontaneously transform into the form and be stuck that way for several days. So, how many more transformations do I have before that happens?" Naruto asked somewhat worriedly, as he had used the technique quite a number of times for pranks, as well as the throw-off pursuit after pranks. "That's just it. I think that your usage against a Hokage may have tipped the balance, but on the bright side, once a transformation becomes permanent this way, it no longer requires chakra to hold up and cannot be dispelled," Kyuubi said in a voice betraying his irritation at the situation. "And once you transform and are stuck, you'll have to learn a control exercise to maintain which form you wish to be in, rather than altering randomly with your thoughts. The good thing about this ability is that you have an additional form to get into, should one of them be damaged, because injuries don't carry across the change, and the injury will regenerate back to normal at about half speed until the form is no longer injured. The bad thing about this ability is the fact that while all of your abilities pass over, none of the resistances that you have trained your body to withstand will pass over." "And the other thing that you wanted to tell me?" Naruto asked, as his mind wrapped around randomly swapping forms every few seconds. "Since the Shinigami explained my imprisonment to you several days after the sealing, I have done the absolute minimum for you that wasn't required of me or forced by the seal," Kyuubi said in a deep booming voice carrying a hint of amusement. There are a number of things that I could have done differently, however, as I told the Shinigami when I was first imprisoned, you haven't done anything very impressive in my eyes, so until you do or it involves our imminent survival, I will maintain the bare minimum, as I have been. I can understand that, and thank you for what you have done. Naruto replied before a sudden thought hit his head. The Shinigami never did tell how to summon souls to use the time that is accumulated, did he? The Kyuubi laughed evilly as Naruto began listing off ridiculous solutions of how to summon the souls before its voice filled with mirth at the mention of some of the various funny thoughts that Naruto had thought up, said. As I understand it, to summon them you place your hand on their name which should be on the bottom of the clock. As Naruto moved over to the clock, he found that there really were names along the bottom of the clock. Kushina Uzumaki followed by a blurring third name and a completely blurred second name. Tapping each of the names he was rewarded by pillars of light and in seconds both of his parents were there having wrapped him in a hug the moment that they had materialized. The following 5 hours were filled with many stories, a huge amount of advice, and quite a bit of embarrassment for Naruto as his parents made up for the time that they had lost with their son. The worst part was when his mother was exclaiming over the sexy body that he was apparently stuck with now and how Win became excited and started running him through the female talk that his father had finished giving him the male version almost an hour earlier. He also found out why part of his mother's name was visible, while his father's was completely blanked out. It was because he knew his mother's maiden name, well he could only guess about his father's name for now. When the 5 hours were up his parents disappeared in another pillar of light as the clock struck 0. Exhausted Naruto fell into a fitful sleep almost as soon as they left, as he had felt many more emotions than he normally did. As Naruto's body slowly vanished from his mindscape, the Kyuubi couldn't help grinning about how much fun all of the chaos and destruction that Naruto would cause over with everything that he had learned over the last 6 years, but it hidden. Laughter boomed from its cage as it thought of all of the mayhem that would spring from the things that people thought they knew about the blonde. The next morning Naruto woke and blurtly looked at the clock to find that it was almost 5 minutes after 11. He was about to write the whole thing off as a dream, except for the fact that he was stuck in his sexy body and he couldn't release the technique and he couldn't retransform back into his normal form. Gathering his things Naruto packed them away into scrolls that he boxed up and then sealed into a large sealing scroll for their journey across the village to one of the many compounds in the village. One thing that Naruto had been given in the last 6 years was access to the old Uzumaki compound that had remained empty since his mother had moved out to live with his father. At one point in time the compound had belonged to the Senju clan, however, when his mother had escaped the fall of Whirlpool, the matriarch of the Senju clan had given the compound to her as a gift of welcome as it had been built to be close but comfortably far enough from the Senju compound for Mito so that she could invite her relatives to spend time in the village without them being put into rooms in the Senju compound. Mito was fond of her relatives, however the same couldn't be said of her husband who wanted some space from his in-laws. Even though Naruto had known about his owning of the compound he couldn't move onto the property until he was a recognized adult because if he had then the civilian council would have demanded entrance and because of the ways that the laws were written he couldn't have done anything about it no matter what they decided to take. However, with his genin status, that was no longer the case even if it was probationary currently. His genin status meant that he was supposedly allowed more restricted materials than an academy student and, as such any and all of his belongings could only be searched and seized with a written order from the current Hokage that was consigned by at least one clan header for 6 years though, Naruto still found it hard to believe that he had come as far as he had in the past 6 years. Training endlessly, studying scroll and book after scroll and book and experimenting endlessly to replicate some of the things that the Uzumaki in the past had done. The compound wasn't very large in comparison to some of the others in the village, however that was because when it had been built, it was supposed to make the first Hokage's in-laws, not wanting them to stay for excessive visits. When Kushina had moved in she had modified the house a lot, as well as the training ground in the back. Currently the training ground was more like a flower garden, and though it had fallen into disrepair after his mother's death, he had fixed it back up long before. Before the previous night he had hung on to every fact that he could get about his parents, and he had come up with only a few facts: his mother's name, her love of gardening and cooking, his parents were powerful ninja, their addiction to ramen, his father's dream, and the fact that they both died the night he was born. Sure, it wasn't much, but it was what he had had to go on until he got to the proper rank or age to be given the information. But he had taken the information and ran with it, trying in some way to be close to them. He kept the garden in very good shape with almost professionally grown quality flowers and herbs well tended. He had studied and tried over half of the numerous recipes that he had, and he had used shadow clones extensively to train in various things since he learned it when he was 8. But in his mind his greatest achievement was the somewhat mediocre ramen that he could make from scratch after spending a 6-month stint working under Tuchiya Kraku. Shadow clones trained for almost 4.5 years with almost 200 going on average, and it was plain to see that Naruto had quite the number of tricks that he had yet to uncover. After he got the last of his things he still kept in his apartment and settled where they belonged in the house, it took Naruto 3 days to grasp and control how to swap forms. However, it wasn't until a week later that he was able to get good enough control of the ability to not change forms unless he wanted to. This increase in control was a good thing, as the day after he managed to acquire it, one of the few people who knew about his change of residence stopped by. So, still trying to get the right setup for that control technique. A voice intruded on his meditating, causing him to fall 3 feet to the ground. Scowling slightly, Naruto returned, "Couldn't you have left me alone for another few minutes, Tenten? I almost held myself on that platform for half an hour." "Yeah, you have told me that, but you missed your delivery yesterday," Tenten replied, "and you said that you would have that other thing ready for me soon, so I decided to check up on it." "The new sword you commissioned?" Naruto asked as he moved toward the back door to the house. Inwardly he was annoyed because of the fact that whenever Tenten was in his workshop, she was fangirlish to a high degree. He usually tried to keep his deliveries on schedule so that she wouldn't have an excuse to go into the workshop. 2 years later they had become friends, and he had shown her the hidden training ground below the compound, and she had first seen his workshop. That had been a terrifying day with how hard she had begged him to let her use some of the weapons that he had made. In the end, they had come to a deal that he would sell so many a month to her grandfather's shop and she could get her weapons from there. 1,000 kunai, 3,000 shuriken, 1,000, and various other items a month, delivered on the second Friday of each month. Moving to the stairs to the lower level, Naruto was surprised that Tenten hadn't already beaten him to the ladder to the training ground. In the basement of the house there was a trapdoor that led down to a hidden underground training ground that he had used for secret training for almost as long as he had known about the compound. He didn't use it when he first started exploring the house because he didn't know about it, but when he was cleaning the house, he found the loose section of flooring in the basement. Opening it, he had been shocked to find a ladder down into a dark pit. Along the edge there was a seal that powered lights in the secret underground room. Since then Naruto had learned of 2 other similar training grounds, one under the Senju compound and the other secreted away for the Hokages, and those they trusted to maintain their training and develop new attacks hidden from spies. Within this training ground he had found out where his mother had kept her forges and extra weaponry. Going back almost 300 years, the Uzumaki clan had in almost all of its branches taught the art of creating weapons, as well as how to use those weapons. Every member of the family had been taught how to perform the basics of the craft, even if they never advanced past that point, and once Naruto had found that out he had pushed himself well past the basics. Finally reaching the actual training grounds, Naruto was pulled out of his thoughts and memories as he looked around the huge underground room. Hordes of clones were moving everywhere around the room, doing what looked like anything and everything. Half the giant room looked like it had been damaged and repaired repeatedly, while the other had been segmented off and stone walls thrown up to keep each area separate from the others. Looking at the clone army working on the various things that were in the damaged section, Naruto nodded to himself because it looked like all of his projects were on track so far. He moved toward what seemed to be a hallway between the walled-off areas, with Tenten trailing after him as she tried to make sense of what the clones were training in. Tenten always enjoyed coming to this room after the first time she had come in here and saw a shadow clone army of her friend working on various things. Of course at first she hadn't understood what was going on, but having a friend who could make hundreds of expendable mobile practice dummies was almost heaven in her mind. Reaching the doorway to the storage room for completed weapons, Naruto pulled down one of his larger ceiling scrolls and began gathering all of the weapons that he needed to fill the current month's order, before stopping to ask, "Did you have anything to add to this month's order?" "Oh, I had completely forgotten," but Anbu Nico stopped by and said that she had finally saved up enough for the one katana that she has been drooling over in the catalog you left in the shop. Tenten answered as she was broken out of dreams of the thousands of projectile weaponry around her flying toward targets. "Tenten, you know that the weapon that she wants isn't actually made until it's ordered because of the more personal nature of weapons like that," Naruto said as he got the last items from their storage shelves and packed them closely enough to seal into the scroll that he had gotten earlier. Carrying the now full scroll toward the door, Naruto stopped at a small shelf that only had 2 scrolls on it. Pulling the scrolls off the shelf, he continued toward the door. Giving her all 3 of the scrolls, he said, "There is the order and the sword that you commissioned from me 2 weeks ago. The last scroll are some techniques that you can use with it, as well as the instructions on how to maintain the blade at maximum efficiency for battle." The shriek that emanated from the room could put all but the most persistent of fangirlish shrieks to shame for its sheer volume and decibel. It left Naruto's head ringing, and by the time he could think straight again, Tenten was gone. The rest of the week leading up to team assignments was almost bleak in comparison, as most of the time Naruto was making armies of shadow clones to train in all kinds of things and to continue his ongoing projects and training himself in many odd ways. The one last bright point of the week was the day before team assignments when he went to turn in his paperwork for ninja registration and he met the Hokage's grandson. What had followed was a testament to how weird the world was sometimes, as he taught Konohamaru the sexy and gave him a couple scrolls that he quickly copied from memory for about 5 different chakra control exercises and another detailing several E-rank techniques in each of the 5 elements that were useful for numerous things while still being easy to learn and use for the academy student. Naruto should have known that his luck couldn't have held out that long, and Konohamaru tutor showed up and got into a fierce argument with Konohamaru about the best way to become Hokage, with Konohamaru being firmly on Naruto's side of the thoughts on the matter. The matter ended with a huge burst of chakra and a huge nosebleed for Ibisu. So all in all, Naruto had a nice week and even a last day before team assignments. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like if you enjoyed my video and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.